we're going to be going over all of the most helpful tips from the first 10 or so getting better at League videos that I've made. These were the tips that people found the most helpful to them. And luckily, we're at a stopping point now where we're going to start to get into in-game content. We're kind of going in chronological order from everything that you can do outside of the game to prepare yourself for being the best player that you can be. And now we're getting to move on to in-game stuff after this one. But I thought it would be good, especially because when I first started doing those videos, some of them were low quality or didn't get as many views as the channel was starting out, and we didn't have as many subscribers. So these are the most helpful tips from all of those videos. And it's also easier now that it's condensed and kind of distilled. So in the first video, we talked about everything related to your gaming setup. And there's a lot of details here that are really important and specifics that you probably have to refer to those videos to see. But the main takeaways are that, you want to use a mouse that sensitivity isn't too low or isn't too high. Most pro players for League use a sensitivity DPI of about 1800 with their Windows sensitivity set to 10. And your in-game sensitivity in League is just going to change your Windows sensitivity. So in my opinion, you should just play League on whatever setting for sensitivity in Windows you would normally use while using your computer, so that even if you're not playing League, you're getting used to your League sensitivity because it'll be exactly the same. So the way that that works is every 5 that you go up in League, because it's a scale of 100, is 1 in Windows. And so what that means is, for example, if you want a 10, which is the default setting out of 20 for your sensitivity for your mouse on Windows, then in League you're going to be at 50. But if you go to 11 on Windows, you're going to be at 55 in League. At 12, you'd be at 60, etc. So that you're getting that same consistent feel. When it comes to your computer, League is actually pretty good in terms of not needing that great of a computer, because you really only need a computer, even at the highest end, that can run League at 360 FPS, because the game really starts to bug out if you have more than 360 FPS. So you really only need a computer that can do that. And then, of course, there's lots of different graphic settings that you can mess with, in-game video settings that you can mess with to kind of lower your quality, so that even if you're on a lower end computer, you're going to be able to start pushing towards getting that 360 FPS, which really brings us into what you should be looking for in terms of a monitor. It's optimal if you wanted the best setup to play with a 360 hertz monitor, but obviously for a lot of people that might be expensive. Or if you're already at a 60 hertz monitor and you don't want to go out and buy a super expensive, 360 hertz monitor, even just upgrading from 60 to 144 or from 144 to 240 makes a huge difference. And the earlier upgrades actually make a bigger difference. So the jump from 60 to 144 is bigger than the jump from 240 to 360. So I would highly recommend, upgrading your monitor. And if you're going to spend the money, I don't know why you wouldn't just go and, it's not that much more. Monitors are kind of expensive as is, so it's not that much more to get a 360. So at least check out the price. So then we have to talk about like how FPS actually works and how your monitor actually works and why it's good to have this high refresh rate. Obviously, you're going to see a huge upgrade in going from 60 frames per second that you're seeing, which is what you're going to get out of a 60 hertz monitor, to 360. We would go higher, but unfortunately League can't really work like we said. Higher than that, your character starts to glitch out. And I've talked to Riot about this, and that seems to be a pretty, it's not an exact number, but there's pretty much a point around there where the game really starts glitching out all the time, and it's kind of unplayable actually. So obviously that's going to be good, because if you're moving from seeing 60 frames per second with the 60 hertz monitor to seeing 360 frames per second with the 360 hertz monitor, you're going to see so much more quickly what's happening in the game. And that's actually going to let you learn the game better. So don't do what I did and play for a decade on a 60 hertz monitor that is not giving you an accurate picture of what's happening quickly in the game. You'll improve so much more quickly mechanically and use all of that practice time well if you're playing on the best setup that you can be playing on, if that's something that's available to you. Now, this is really important. Even if you can't go out and upgrade your monitor, or you don't have a 360 hertz monitor, it's still really important to have as much FPS as you can, even if your monitor's refresh rate doesn't support displaying all of those frames. The reason for this is pretty straightforward. If your computer is generating 360 FPS, your computer is generating 360 frames per second, and even if your monitor can only display 144 of them or 60 of them, when it chooses those 60, it's drawing from a more recent image because your computer is making 6 times the amount of images that your graphics or that your monitor can display to you. And so when it does go to grab that image that it's going to put up on your monitor, it's going to be a more recent, less delayed image. And if your computer is already capable of running League, even if you can't get to 360 FPS, which is kind of the max that League can run at, even if you're playing on a 60 hertz monitor and you can get 200 FPS, that's much better than playing on a 60 hertz monitor at 60 FPS. So League's in-game settings unfortunately cap the only setting option is the maximum one is to 240 to cap your FPS. So if you go uncapped, you're going to start glitching out if your computer can go higher than 360. But if you go 240, it's actually too low. So you have to go into your graphics card settings, so usually your NVIDIA control panel settings, and there's going to be settings in there to limit your FPS, and you would set it that way. So you can set a custom FPS hard limit either for League or for your computer globally at 360 FPS. So that's how you would go about getting the best monitor, the best computer, pretty standard stuff with a mouse. Keyboard is pretty much personal preference, although people claim that obviously like mechanical keyboards can be nice for getting a more tactile response, it feeling a little bit better, and you being able to get some audio cues more clearly when you're clicking buttons and things like that. But that's all kind of personal preference. So moving on from those important tips from the first video, I should mention ping as well. Ping isn't something that you can do a whole lot to change, but ping is highly important. I really believe that ping played a pivotal role in me improving from being stuck in like low diamond and plat to getting to masters and GM. And I don't think it was a coincidence that I was stuck there and then I ended up moving out to college in a place that had much lower ping, and then I suddenly shot up in rank. And just like playing on a really good monitor or a really good computer, especially if you're really serious about the game, playing on worse ping teaches you the game wrong, because there are certain ability usages that you can't look for because it's so inconsistent. If your everything is too slow, if your computer's too slow, your monitor's too slow, or your ping is too slow, then you're not going to be able to look for these plays consistently. And so the way that matchups interact with each other and when you would use an ability to counter what, and can you get an auto attack off before this ability happens or something, all of this dynamics about the game completely change what you can do depending on these things. So there are some things that you can do about your ping. So for example, if you live in an area with fiber, getting fiber is going to increase your internet speed in a way that doesn't just increase your download or upload speed, but can actually decrease your ping and speed up your connection to the server. The other thing, and I don't know how this works because I've never done this before, but there are companies claiming that you can use a VPN that's located closer to the server, and somehow that's supposed to help reduce your ping. So there are some companies that are like VPNs for gamers that are claiming that they can reduce your ping. I'm not sure technically how that would work. And again, I've never used something like that, so approach that with caution. But that is something that would be worth looking into, especially if you're on the upper end of the ping scale. If you're like 60 ping plus, that's like moderate to high ping. If you're 100 plus, I would consider that to be like very high ping, like very difficult to make serious progression in the game. Like There are players who get to masters with 100 plus ping, but it is a feat when they do it. There are like a handful of people who do it, and it's like a feat. 60 plus ping, obviously you can do it, but you're playing at a competitive disadvantage to other people. And very interesting that the league server used to be located in California, and all of the pro players used to come out of the same Bay Area in California because that's where the server was, and those were the players who had the best competitive advantage in solo queue because of ping, and the best practice environment because of ping. Now a lot of the best players are coming out of the Midwest, all of the best colleges when it comes to league, for the most part. Not all of them, but most of them are located in the Midwest. I think it's no surprise that the vast majority of really good high elo players right now that are up and coming are all coming out of the Midwest now that the server's in Chicago. So, keep that in mind, especially if you're really serious about the game. If you're starting to get into much higher ranks, that's something that's really worth taking into account. In video 2, we talked about in-game settings. And again, I don't think that there's any in-game setting that's like particularly crazy that would be worth highlighting, since this is just kind of a recap. But yeah, you obviously want to optimize your in-game settings. So big things would be like visual settings that you can potentially decrease in order to get your FPS up. I think the biggest one with that, it doesn't look great, but you can decrease the environmental quality, which is really just like the layout of the map, like the ground. And it actually, I think, increases visual clarity, because even though it looks kind of, it looks a little bit bland and bad, it actually decreases the texture on the ground. And so the ground looks very flat, and it's very obvious when you have high textured abilities moving across the ground, and the ground is like low texture, low quality. It's actually much easier visually to see what's happening and to see abilities. And so it's not only something that's going to increase your FPS if you need more FPS on a PC that you're trying to get to 360 and your PC is not always getting there, but I think it can also actually add visual clarity. And usually the problem is that the trade-off is, do I want to give up visual clarity in order to get more FPS? And so that kind of thing is great to change. The other thing is, everybody quick casts their abilities, but everyone forgets to then go in and change their shift plus keys, so that so normally your abilities when you first start the game are normal casted. And if you shift queue or shift cast an ability, it's going to quick cast it automatically. But when you quick cast all your abilities, which you should do and everyone does, if you don't rebind those settings, they're just going to do the same thing as you would if you pressed Q. So shift Q does the same thing as Q. But you want to rebind those so that in situations where you do have time to pull out your abilities range, you're sitting in a bush, or level 1 you want to hook over a wall or something like that. There's plenty of scenarios where it's actually really convenient and nice to be able to quickly and easily normal cast your abilities like that. So basic things like that. I play with the chat off. I think that that's really, really helpful. So things like that. Honestly, you just have to run through the settings video though, and kind of copy most of those settings in order to figure that out. But yeah, I do recommend running through that. It's just these things are free improvement, right? They don't even have to do with learning the game. It's just like you optimize some of this stuff and it can make you so much a better player, like just by changing your setup and your settings and stuff like that. It's crazy to me that people wouldn't take advantage of this. In video 3, we talked about in-game fix stuff, meaning like how the game works. Nexus, turrets, inhibitors, gold, XP, minions, jungle camps, all the neutral objectives, stuff like that, and champion stats. And I think this is another one where if you don't understand how these things work, you really need to watch the video or read into it. But I think that there were big ones that I think stood out, as most people, even who you would expect to understand these basic things, myself included, are missing the mark when it comes to certain things. And so for champion stats, 100% the biggest one in champion stats is armor and magic resist. I think that people who start to get into armor and magic resist, again, myself included at points, you start to see the percentage that you're gaining from each armor and magic resist that you buy, and you're thinking to yourself, okay, I'm getting less and less the more armor and magic resist I buy, because when I go from 0 to 1 armor, I get, huge percentage increase. But when I go from 100 to 101 armor, I'm getting like a 1% increase in my damage reduction. So it feels like you're getting diminishing returns, but that's not actually true. And it's really important because it changes a lot about the way that you think about, should I build like 100 armor and magic resist and then stop building it and focus on health? Or should I actually keep building armor and magic resist throughout the game? And the answer is, and I'll explain it, is that you should keep building armor and magic resist. But I think a ton of people make that mistake of thinking that armor and magic resist gets worse as it scales, or as you get more of it, and so they do the wrong thing with their build. Actually, people who have looked into it, right, which is the most unfortunate thing. It's like they've looked into it, but they don't quite understand how it works, so they end up doing the wrong thing with their build. They would have been better off not even looking into it. So the way that this works is, if you just think intuitively, really what matters is your effective HP. And if you were to give somebody, let's say, 1% reduced damage for each point of armor no matter what, when they hit 100 armor, they take 0 damage. Well, obviously that's just not practical, because if someone has the ability to actually reach 100% physical damage reduction, that would be very broken, because they wouldn't be able to take any damage. So what you obviously have to have when you think about how you would design the game is you have to have, a system that is going to approach 100%, but not actually get there. And then when we think about effective HP, let's say that you have 1,000 HP and you have the armor that's equivalent to 50% damage reduction. So when you have the armor that's equivalent to 50% damage reduction, what is your effective HP going to be? Well, they're going to need to do 2 times as much damage to you, because you're blocking half of the damage. So they need to do 2 times as much damage to you to deal all of your HP. So if you have 1,000 HP and 50% damage reduction, you have 2,000 effective HP. Now think about what happens when you have 66% damage reduction. Even though that's only a 16% increase, what happens when you have 66% or 2/3 damage reduction is, when you think about how much effective HP that you have, what happens? Well, if they deal, like 1,000 damage to you, 2/3 or 66% of it's being blocked. So 666 of that damage is being blocked, and only 1/3, 333, is getting through. So they have to do 3 times as much damage. So your effective HP with 50% physical damage reduction and 1,000 HP is 2,000 HP. And your effective HP with 66% physical damage reduction is 3,000 HP. So you're actually gaining 1,000 effective HP with both, amounts of armor. And so actually the way that it works in League is that each point of armor or each point of magic resist increases your effective HP by 1%. So they actually do provide the same amount of value. Question is whether it's worth it to build HP at the HP and armor values that you have, or whether it's worth it to build the resistance instead at that point. And so you want to be following this curve between health and resistances, not just not building resistances at all, or stopping at a certain amount of resistances because you feel like the percentage is falling off. Even though the percentage that you're gaining is falling off, it's increasing your effective HP by just as much. So that's a really big misconception in League that I think people don't understand, that I was caught up in, and that I learned a lot when we were doing that one. So there's a lot of, stuff like that when it comes to basic stats and things like that about the way that the game works. I think people are starting to catch on to this one, but it's still a big problem. When you take an inhibitor, you only get one wave of super minions, coming down one lane. And it's very difficult to do anything by taking one inhibitor. Essentially, think about it like this. When you have a super minion in one lane, you're not threatening really any towers for the most part. And especially if you take it way too early, where there's not a whole lot for you to do, or even you take it later, but you can't translate it into a Baron or an important dragon or something like that, all that you're doing is giving the enemy team an extra 90 gold and some extra XP every minion wave. And you're also using that super minion to push that lane for you in a way that's denying your team XP and gold for the most part, unless you're pushing with that super minion. You're denying your team XP and gold for an entire lane. So your team's gold is going to be the 3 lanes and your jungle. And so you can imagine that if you're cutting off like a third of your team's income from lanes because that super minion's running down and clearing the whole wave before you guys can get to it, you have to make the most out of that push, because you're literally losing hundreds of gold for your team by taking an inhibitor. And so if you don't end the game off of that, or you don't take a Baron, if you lose 2 or 3 minion waves worth of gold and XP because that super minion pushed that wave and you couldn't get any of that, and because they got an extra 90 gold and the XP every single wave, I mean, we're talking about, like, if you just do the math on that, you're having to probably gain like 1,000 gold somewhere else, maybe even more, just to break even on taking an inhibitor. And so really think about whether it's worth it to take an inhibitor early, and also think about, you get 2 super minions in each lane if you take all 3 inhibitors at the same time. And that's such a big upgrade from just taking one, that a lot of times I'll see in games, teams are just happy to get an inhibitor, and so they'll take one, and then maybe they'll take 2, and then one will respawn, and then they'll take the middle one or something, and they're going back and forth, and they're never coordinating all 3 inhibitors being down at the same time to actually get the bonus and the buff from it that they need. And so you need to be really sure when you're taking an inhibitor that you're actually going to get something out of that push. Otherwise, you're actually really trolling by taking inhibs. So that's another big one. I think people are doing that more and more. People know not to take an inhib now if it's like really early on into the game. I assume, of course, the lower rank you go, maybe this isn't implemented. Maybe it is. But that's something that I think will change about the way people approach the game in the next couple of years, is I think people are going to stop taking inhibs like nearly as much, because you just do some quick basic math on it, and it's like really bad to take an inhibitor unless you're going to end the game or take Baron and end the game off of it. Okay, so then we talked about item sets and runes. And again, the big problem I have with this one is I'm not going to be able to run through, especially in a video that's just meant to recap some of the most important things we learned. Can't really, even in those videos, longer form, my intention isn't really to run through every item in the game or to run through every rune in the game. And those things change quite a lot. Really, it's the mindset that you need to have and the ability to ascertain for yourself, what should I be taking on my champion and how do I approach runes and items? And I think the most obvious answer is that, and I've given this answer for a lot of things, a lot of the reason why these videos are so boring, this out of game stuff, is because if you're lower rank, you need to spend a lot of time playing and practicing the game and learning the game. And if you focus on all these other things, which are really, for me, like all of these things are optimizations that came later. But in the beginning, you don't need to understand how items work in a super in-depth detailed way where you're going to go and theory craft your own build that nobody else is running. In fact, I think it's too much of a risk. If you're a player who is a rank that shows that you obviously don't understand a ton about the game, of course it's possible for you to understand and learn a bunch about items and theory craft something good and interesting, or to happen to fluke into a really amazing build that nobody else is running. The reality is that if you're deviating from what most people are doing on your champion and you're not an expert at your champion, you're probably trolling. And so I recommend, way more than anything else, just copying the build and runes that are having success and that most people are running on your champion. Maybe look into, like, if you were looking at Braum, you look into a player like me, you look into my guides, you look into what I'm doing on my op.gg in my games, and maybe you say, okay, this guy is maybe going a slight variation off of the standard build that most people are going, or he's doing this item different or something. I'm either going to follow that or I'm going to follow the standard thing. But either way, Deviating too far, I even worry now myself, and I understand items really well. When there's something that I think might be good, but there's no data behind it, and because nobody runs it, and there's just obviously a consensus that most people don't think it's good, I worry that if I were to commit to doing something crazy like that, I'm going to put myself at a major disadvantage, because if it turns out that that decision or those items or runes were wrong, I'm going to put myself at a major disadvantage when really I should just be having mostly the right generic runes and items, and then focusing on improving my gameplay, where there's always room to do that even when you're much higher up. So that's, that's the main thing, is like, for most people it's just going to be to copy those things. For other people who really enjoy items and runes and coming up with builds as a part of the game, which I do as well, it takes a lot of learning and details, and like going through all the items and understanding what they all do, and understanding what your champion benefits from. So for example, if I was taking a champion like Braum, we think of all the different stats in the game. What stats does Braum want the most? Well, if we think about his scaling on his abilities, he does have some scalings on his abilities, but they're mostly a bait, right? Like, he has an AP ratio on his ult, but that's ridiculous because you're barely ever using that. And you have no AP scaling on anything else. So you're not going to actually want to build any AP. He actually does, his W gives a little bit more armor and magic resist based on his resistances, but that doesn't mean you necessarily want to try to over-index on those just for your W, because it's such a small bonus. It's a couple % of your bonus armor and magic resist that you have, and so you'd have to have such an absurd amount before it starts to make a difference on your W that it just doesn't really make sense to tunnel vision on that. His E has no ratios, and then his Q does more damage the more health that you have. But again, it's a very small ratio. And people fall into this trap. I hear all the time people saying how good health is on Braum because it also increases the damage on his Q. And that just doesn't matter at all. It's like a completely negligible, tiny amount of damage that he's getting on his Q. I don't build up, Warmogs or a bunch of extra health because I think that, it's good because it makes Braum Q do more damage. I build it purely because I think the health is a good stat on the champion. So then we think about Braum, he's very interesting in that his kit doesn't really have a whole lot of inherent synergy with certain stats in terms of doing damage, because he's not really a damage-oriented champion. You could say that like he has some synergy with attack speed, might be the first conclusion that you jump to, because obviously his passive, he can get that off more and put it on more people, maybe in a team fight quicker if he has more attack speed. But that's kind of ridiculous as well, because he's relying on his teammates in order to get those auto attacks in, not doing it himself. He also can use his Q to get a passive stack. And so he doesn't only need to have attack speed in order to do that. He's also a melee champion, so even if you were going to build him based on attack speed or something like that, you'd need to combine it with tanky stats in order to gap close onto people. And then you have to think about, is Braum really chasing people down, or is Braum peeling and trying to fight backwards? And obviously Braum is a champion that's trying to fight backwards. So Braum's not trying to build like a bruiser with attack speed where you chase people down in a team fight, because you're just trying to kite back anyways. So you don't really need that much more attack speed when people are walking into you, past you, to try to get onto somebody anyways. Like, the attack speed just makes a marginal difference at that point. So all of those things. Also, like, okay, you're going to find a lot of scenarios where you have attack speed and you're proccing your passive when your team was already going to proc your passive anyways. So the attack speed's just giving you a little bit of extra damage only on your autos in a way that you don't really need on Braum. So obviously the stats that stand out as actually good on Braum are like health, armor, magic resist, ability haste to a certain extent, movement speed, basic things like this. Since he's a very defensive utility oriented champion, and most of his abilities are standalone and don't really need stats through his build to help them. So he mostly needs things like tankiness and maybe some ability haste and movement speed and that sort of thing. So you're going to, find items that give those things, focus less on items that don't give those things, and try to find the best bang for your buck, more or less. when taking the item stats and the passives and things into account. Same deal with runes. You're just making a basic math comparison between, this rune and that rune, and then maybe you go and check. You say, well, I think this one's better mathematically because it's going to block more damage for me during a game. But, looking at like bone plating versus second wind, for example. But you could also go to like a website like Lolalytics, which I use all the time, and you're just going to check like, okay, that's my hypothesis on what's good. Let me see what's going on with win rate. And, of course, be careful with win rates, especially with items, because there's a lot of other things that can impact an item's win rate besides its power level. For example, its cost should increase its win rate if it's a more expensive item and you actually manage to complete it. So there's a completion bias there. You're also going to have items that people build when they're ahead and don't build as much when they're behind, like Knight's Vow, and those items are going to have an inflated win rate. So going by win rate data alone is not very good, but usually my process is to combine my hypothesis about what I think is the best with looking at how those runes are stacking up or items are stacking up and comparing in terms of the statistics, and then maybe I play it in game and then get a sense for how it's doing and how it feels in game as well. So, that's all fine and good. In video 6, we talked about how ranked works. This is probably one of the most important things, obviously, before you get into game and start trying to climb ranked, because there's a lot of understanding that needs to go into how ranked works. And essentially, I don't want to rehash the entire video because I think the whole thing's important, but essentially the gist of it is that, nowadays on a new account that's never played ranked before, your normals are going to affect your ranked. So that's really important to keep in mind, that you want to try hard in those normal games before you place your account. And if you're a new player and you want to try to start out higher, which I don't necessarily even recommend doing. I mean, what's the difference if you start in bronze 3 or bronze 4? It doesn't really make a whole lot of difference. I know it may feel like that. It certainly felt like that to me in the beginning when I got placed in bronze 3, but it just doesn't make that much of a difference in the long run. And you're going to forget about it really fast if you end up dropping league, and if you end up sticking with it and getting really good at the game. Whether you started in bronze 4 and had a little bit more of a nice learning curve, time to win more games and learn things about the game while you're playing ranked, that's going to feel nicer than if you start, at your absolute peak and then immediately get stuck and can't make any progress. So, but if you're trying to do that, right, keep in mind that your normal game MMR is going to affect your placements nowadays. And then you complete your placements, and essentially the way that league ranked works, to the best understanding that we have, is that you have a starting MMR. Those normal games are going to impact your starting MMR up or down, and then you're going to play your placement games. Your first games of a split or a season, anytime there's a ranked reset, the first ranked games that you play are going to have more impact than later on games. So there are going to be diminishing returns to the more and more games you play. So your first 5 games, your placements, way more important than your next 10. Your next 10, way more important than your next 25, which are way more important than your next 50. And then once an account has really even gotten to like 100, 200, 300 games played per reset, that account is probably pretty baked in. That doesn't mean that you can't climb higher or end up demoting lower. I've played on this account since I was bronze 3 when I first got placed in like season 3. So it's totally possible to go through periods of demoting hugely and then still fixing your MMR and climbing back on the same account. And it's possible to, just fluctuate up and down on all these things. But the main point is that once you've played that many games, the rank system has a solid understanding of what rank you're about. And unless you start performing better and winning a higher percentage of your games, you're probably going to be stuck at your peak for a while and need to make some improvements to the way that you play the game in order to win. The way that the matchmaking works is it's going to try to find 5 players on one team and 5 players on the other team that have where the average MMR of each team is only about 20 MMR apart. And you're going to get into game. Blue side, red side also have like slightly different MMR dynamics, which they just changed. And you're going to get into game, and one team is going to have a tiny MMR advantage and one team is going to have a tiny MMR disadvantage. You win more MMR if you're winning versus a team that's supposed to be slightly better than you. You lose slightly more MMR if you're playing against a team that's supposed to be slightly worse than you, etc. And you just need to win more than you're losing, and you're going to gain MMR and climb. Even if you lose LP through dodging or decay or any of these things, all that really matters is your MMR, because your MMR is going to pull your face rank towards it. So the way that this happens, and it can be really tilting for people, is let's say that when you start climbing, if I was smurfing and started winning 70, 80, 90% of my games, my MMR is going up rapidly, but my MMR is probably higher than my rank, as I'm very quickly, boosting up my MMR, but my rank is still slow to catch up. And the opposite can happen where, let's say you're just a regular player and you happen to lose some games at 0 LP, and things like that. When you lose a game and you don't lose any LP for it, obviously the result is that your MMR is going to be higher than your face rank, or actually your face rank in this case is going to be higher than your MMR, because your face rank is remaining stagnant while your MMR is declining. And that can get you into these cycles where, because of the demotion protection that you have at the 4th division of a rank, and because of losing games in a division at 0 LP, essentially you're going to rack up all these extra losses potentially, and your MMR can be a division below where your face rank is. And then it can feel like the game is trying to demote you, because it is. Like, your face rank is too high, you're going to lose more LP than you gain, and the game is going to try to pull you to that rank. But keep in mind that the game is trying to pull you to a rank where you're winning 50% of your games. If you were capable of winning 51% of your games there, you would win more games, increase your MMR, and your rank would increase as a result. But if you were at a place where you were only winning 49% of your games, your MMR would drop, your rank would follow, and then you'd move eventually to a place where you're winning 50% of your games. So the way that the rank system works is it's trying to situate you at a place where you're winning 50% of your games. Not because it wants to put you in a place where you're stuck, but because the most fair place for you to be playing is the rank where you belong, which is the rank where you're average with those average players at that rank, and you're only winning 50% of your games. Instead of thinking, oh no, I'm stuck, I'm not making any progress in rank, or the system's trying to keep me down and keep me at a 50% win rate, focusing on your teammates' mistakes and the reason why, that last game was a loss instead of a win. What you need to be doing is thinking about, how can I improve my gameplay so that I'm able to win 51 or 52% of my games instead of 50%. And so you focus on yourself and the things that you could be doing better. And even if you see really frustrating plays from other people, you focus on the mistakes that you're making that you could improve, even if they're smaller mistakes, because those are the things that you're going to be able to consistently fix game to game, so that you're moving to 51% at that rank and then starting to climb again. And, the best ranked experience, hopefully, that you would experience is, just kind of a slow, steady climb up through the ranks, constantly winning, 51 to 55% of your games. It takes a long time and a lot of games, even if you're winning 55% of your games, to climb all the way up through all of the ranks that there are. But eventually you will get there. So that's the gist of how the rank system works. Queuing, champion select, looking up your team banning and dodging. This one we talked about recently. Oh, actually, we're jumping to 7. So 7 is just right before you go to queue up for a match. Actually, it's really important that you understand that League, like any activity, I've said this so many times, is something that you want to be operating at full brain power. So, for example, you don't want to be doing this at 1 in the morning when you're really tired. Cough, cough. I never do anything at 1 in the morning when I'm tired, except all my videos. But you want to be playing when you're at your best, when you're at your peak. And so an easy way, like messing with those settings we talked about in the beginning, to kind of artificially improve your peak performance is to just only play when you're feeling really well and really aware. And it's also going to be a better use of your time, because if you're serious about getting better at League and improving at the game, spending time playing when you're just zoning out and not paying any attention to the game is not helpful for you improving, not likely to win you games, and kind of a waste of your teammates' time if you're just like not paying attention and trolling. Whereas you want to be playing when you're at your absolute peak, because if you use your peak awake and aware hours to play the game, that's when you're going to have the most improvement, learn the most things, and have the most highest chance at success. So that's really important. So what I mean by that is, and you start to flush out this list even more than the things that I have, but like making sure you don't have to go to the bathroom before the game, making sure you're not thirsty, hungry, that you've had a shower and have good personal hygiene, and that's not like affecting you. I get really uncomfortable if I haven't taken a shower, and so like even the way that I'm going to sit, I'm not going to be as comfortable, and I'm going to be like a little bit more I don't know what the word for it is. You could feel a little bit slow. You could be a little bit clammy. You could be a little bit itchy and uncomfortable. And that's just not good for trying to do your best at something where you have to, sit here and have really good control over your body. Same thing with like mood. If you're like upset or something like that, not a good time to play. Play in really nice surroundings, clean your room before you play and things like that. Take care of your responsibilities so that you're not stressing about stuff. Have a good temperature. Don't play when you're freezing. It's going to be hard to be precise and control your mouse really consistently. Don't play when it's too hot. You're going to fry your brain and not be able to make as good decisions and think as well. And, another big one is like humidity, or, I've talked about like using like lotion and stuff like that now, or a humidifier can be a big one as well. Like if it's too dry, it can be really hard to grip properly. And it can just feel bad on the hands. So obviously, like I've kind of incorporated all of these things into just the way my office is set up, and what I do in between every game. And so it's pretty straightforward, right? It's like I want to play at good hours when lots of people are playing and queuing up for the game. And so that is actually very healthy, because rather than playing for like 10 or 20 hours a day, which I wouldn't be able to do anyways, too busy. But, if you had time to play, you're actually going to get more out of playing from like 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. when everyone's playing than you, and to really focus in on those games than to just be grinding from, 1 in the morning until 7 in the morning. Sleep is another really important one, obviously, with this. Faker was asked, how to get good at League, or something like that, or, what makes you so good at League. And he said, eat well, sleep well. And so it really is all that simple. You're much more angry if you haven't eaten. Sleep is super, super important, and being consistent about it. And you can actually use League as kind of a life hack. If you're really motivated by League, if you're really good at the game and take it very seriously, you can use League to like fix all of your habits. These are all habits that I think young men should establish anyways. As they're, it's fun to, when you first move out, it's fun to like be able to have all this freedom and like stay up whenever you want and troll around and stuff like that. But you have to start getting serious at some point too. And it's important for young men, especially, I think, to build discipline. And, even as stupid as it sounds, if you can get that out of League, absolutely take that. If you take nothing else from League, take, trying to get good at League or trying to do something well. It doesn't even have to be League, but, discipline yourself in order to do that. Like have good discipline with the way that you want to be taking care of yourself and your sleep and all of these things. If you take care of all of these things, you'll perform better, not just at League, but at anything you ever try to do. So those are all really important. Okay, then we get into like queuing up, champion select, that sort of thing. And basically, we just covered this one, but the basics were pretty much when you queue up right now and you get to queue up for roles. I think the main tip that's really helpful is that you're going to get autofill protection if your role's priority. But even if your role's not currently priority, don't just sit here and queue up. Like, refresh your lobby and see if you can get a different role to be priority. So like, we did this in the previous one. It's like the middle of the night right now, so I'm not sure that it's going to change very quickly or at all. But we showed in the last one that if you do this, and if you're patient for 5 minutes or something, which is well worth it to not get autofilled, you can just switch this around, and eventually these other roles will become priority, especially as different people exit the queue and actually get into champion selects and into games. And so, hopefully eventually you'll get your role priority. And then the other thing about this is not something you have to do in between every game. This is something that you can do just once per session at the beginning of your session, because as long as you don't exit the lobby that you've made or close your client in between games, as long as this lobby is maintained, if you started with priority, it's going to keep priority even for your second, third, fourth, fifth game. You just need to get it once in the beginning. So I think it's well worth it if you're about to sit down and play like 6 games or something, especially, to just make sure that you get priority for the role that you want, first. Unfortunately, it's the middle of the night and it's NA, which is a dead region, and it's not changing, but I showed it in the last one. So, that's actually a really important one to avoid getting autofilled a lot. And then basic champion select management, right? Like, ban a champion in your role so that you're not banning one of your teammates' champions. Pick a good ban that's a champion that's actually being picked a lot, and has a high win rate in your role that you would never play and is potentially good against your champion. Don't just ban some champion that's annoying you right now, or the last champion that you lost to that you felt was too strong. That is a really bad way to approach the ban. Every patch, you should just consistently know, okay, I'm banning this champion every single game consistently, because it's like you're playing the odds. Like, you want the most consistently good ban. Not something that's going to feel really nice in the 1% of games where they would have picked that champion you hate, but something that's like in 10, 20% of games going to ban a champion that they might be looking to pick. Don't get too creative with counter picking. Focus on a really, tight champion pool and that sort of thing. In number 9, we just went over patch notes and how to read those efficiently. But I think the most obvious piece of advice there was, to be honest, like, especially if you're not super motivated to go through the notes on your own, or you're not that interested in like the balance of the game and the changes, helps that I'm like trying to keep up with the game, but I'm also interested in the way that they're balancing the game. And I like to see the decisions that Riot makes and whether I think that they're really dumb or whether they're good. And so it helps me to, to look at those, or because it's a little bit more interesting for me. Still hasn't changed. Rip 80 carry players. But obviously, the most obvious tip that I gave for that one is just, there's tons of people who make really good YouTube videos covering the patch notes. You get the benefit of it being easier to follow because you're just like listening to somebody talk about it. Although I highly recommend watching it and reading it along with them. Otherwise, you're not going to be, and pausing it when you have questions about things or trying to scan for, keeping up with reading. But it's really nice to have somebody who's high rank and is probably going to interpret the patch better than you to tell you whether they think a change is meaningless or whether it's really big, impactful change. And then, like I said, keep a lookout for like big system-wide changes or item changes or changes to champions that affect the way their kit works, not just their numbers. Because if you know that, it affects their damage by 5% or 10% or 5 damage or 10 damage, you're not going to know that until you feel it in game again. And even then, it probably is going to take games for you to really adjust to the fact that some ability does 10 extra damage or something like that. It's going to take a while to even notice that. And it's definitely not going to instantly like, oh, because I read in the patch notes there's 10 damage off of the ability, oh, I go into game and now I know exactly how to play differently against that champion. It's never going to work like that for the human brain. You just have to play against those changes a lot of times before they register. They may even change it again before you get comfortable playing with those damage changes. So really you want to be focused on, did I miss a fundamental change to the way that one of the abilities works? Because I'll tell you from personal experience that when one of the first things that you do when you're learning the game is you learn what all the champions do, what all the abilities do and stuff like that. I feel like over the years, since so many things have changed, even though I've kept up with patch notes mostly throughout the years, it's been so long since season 3. I mean, it's been like 11 or 12 years since I started playing the game and learned those abilities and champions that were in the game. There are so many abilities I don't really even remember, even though I'm a Masters player, even though I've hit GM multiple times and this split. There's so many abilities and champions I honestly don't remember how they work anymore. I mean, I know what their abilities are and what they generally do, but there's parts of their abilities that, especially when you think about abilities, passives and stuff like that, that you don't see. There's no visual indication. It just does something, sometimes completely even unrelated. Like an ability will have an active and that active, but you didn't realize that the ability had a passive that was doing some totally separate thing as well. Not the champion's passive, but a passive on one of their just random basic abilities. So there's so many things like that over the years, you read one change once, even if you did keep up with it, or, you read it, either you missed it and that change happened and now all of a sudden it's different, and that happens over and over again, or you read it one time but you don't remember how it works and there's no real clear way to visually see that it's changed in the game, and so you just never remember and never learn the change. So that can be really hard. And then number 10, just for VOD reviewing efficiently. Again, I think that for the most part, if you're low rank, you're probably going to want to focus on playing the game more than spending time VOD reviewing. But I definitely think the higher up you go, the more you can benefit from VOD reviewing. And I definitely think that you can VOD review on your own, because you always have the advantage of, first off, hindsight and getting to slow down and spend as much time thinking about the situation as you want. So I honestly believe that a bronze player is going to be able to look at the way that a bronze player is playing, or the way that they're playing, and they could honestly look at a replay from their own game, and obviously with extra time to make the decision, and with more time to not just be focused on their abilities and stuff like that, but see the bigger picture on the map of what's going on, they can probably identify what the correct play was and what's going on, or at least a slightly better version than what they did in the game. So even a bronze player can review their own games and get some improvement out of it, but you probably benefit more from just queuing up and playing more games. So as you get higher rank and you care more and more about VOD reviewing, the way to go about it is not to just run through the entire game and look at every single mistake that you made. It's to look at key moments in the game where the gold swung a huge amount one way or another, even if it was not mostly your mistake, even if it was just something catastrophic happened to your team, and ask yourself really proactive questions about, even if all these guys died on the other side of the map, how could I have been there or prevented that from happening? Was there a way I could have pinged or communicated that play? Was there, some reason why we were super far behind in the first place and this play went so poorly in the, at all, in the first place? And so even if it's not a play that's mostly on you, figure out how you would have the best and biggest impact that you could on a play that really had a big impact on the outcome of the game, even if the change that you needed to make was 10 minutes before that play, or not giving all these kills to this person, or, recalling at a different time, so that you had vision there before the fight, or so that you were there, or having TP up for the fight because you didn't have to blow it on some other play. Really think about not just immediately how could I have prevented this from happening, but long term, what were all of the things that led to the situation happening and me not having the ability to prevent it. So that's a really good way to kind of approach VOD reviewing instead. So that about sums up the first 10 videos. And like I said, this means very fortunately that we can start finally getting into some in-game concepts. And so these are going to be some really, I think, in-depth, high-level, concepts that I think people are going to be more interested in and look forward to a lot. And we can say goodbye to me for now, sitting on the client yapping, and say hello to some actual gameplay footage, which will probably be a nice bit of a update. Still support in jungle. So sorry to all you players who don't play support in jungle, but this is why you don't queue at 3 a.m. as well. So good luck in solo queue and have a wonderful day. And I'll see you back tomorrow for our first video where we're really diving into the depths, the bowels of the in-game content. So best of luck.